Journey Through Sci-Fi. My name is James.
My name is Matt.
And today's episode, we are getting turned into animals and living in luxury apartments, and both of which are very dystopian, as is the trend this series. Are you excited to chat about these two today, Matt? These two films? I mean, we haven't even said what the films are. I'm just too excited to get into it today.
I'm excited too, but the films that we're looking at are a couple of post-modern dystopian movies. I'm going to be talking first about The Lobster, directed by Yorgos Lanthimos, and then we're going to be talking about High Rise, directed by Ben Wheatley, both from 2015.
Yes, 2015 seems to have been the year for post-modern dystopias.
Yeah, strange vibes in the air in cinema, I guess, and in British European cinema as well, because they're both kind of UK/European productions.
Yeah, I feel like I don't really remember what happened in 2015. It seems like a bit of a random year. Like I can't remember it, but obviously there was something in the air, like you just said, that made these directors put out these two rather strange dystopian films.
I'd say it was like the last year that everything was more normal. Right.
Oh, the golden days.
Yeah, but something was in the air, and Lanthimos and Wheatley were tapping into it.
Yes, they most definitely were. So shall we get straight into it? Shall we chat about The Lobster first from 2015?
Yes, let's go.
Have you ever been on your own before?
No, never.
Your last relationship lasted how many years?
Around 12.
Sexual preference?
Women. Is there a bisexual option available?
No, sir, this option is no longer available. And the dog?
My brother, he was here a couple of years ago, but he didn't make it.
Did you read the leaflet?
Yes, I did.
As you understand from your brother's experience, if you fail to fall in love with someone during your stay here, you'll turn into an animal.
Have you ever danced with anybody?
Yes.
As an animal, you'll have a second chance to find a companion.
What sort of dancing did you do?
Just depends on the music.
Mind if I join you?
It's no coincidence that the targets are shaped like single people and not couples.
This is a strange one, isn't it?
Yeah, even stranger than I expected. I haven't seen this one before, and I've only seen one other Lanthimos film, which is The Favourite, which is brilliant, but much more naturalistic. And I knew, I mean, the concept of this is so strange. So I sort of knew what I was getting into, but kind of right from the jump, I was on the back foot with it a little bit, just didn't know what to expect or what was going on. But that's a really enjoyable experience with some films, and particularly with this one.
Yeah, I've been excited to chat to you about this one because I saw this a while back. I think it was close to when it came out, but it, like you said, it does put you on the back foot. It's a very strange film. It's such a bizarre concept in it as well. But somehow it's really like you can relate to it. It's a very sort of like, it's a personal dystopian story, but it's got this crazy setup, hasn't it? What did you think of the setup first off?
What setup are you talking about? The sort of the turning into animals premise?
Yeah, the premise, yeah.
But that's not the setup in a way, is it? There's the other setup, which is just the general sort of like partnering off and finding a partner. And in practice, turning people into animals doesn't come into the film very much. It's in there in the introduction. And even the title of the film is a little bit misleading because the main character, Colin Farrell's character, is the titular lobster, but he never becomes a physical, literal lobster. He remains a human. So that feels like a bit of a red herring. But it's introduced in the in the intro of the film, and it's introduced so matter of factly, like everything is stated so matter of factly throughout the film. You just roll with it, don't you? And especially for David, his attitude towards it, the way he just like straight off the bat, I want to be a lobster. They live till 100, fertile all their lives. He's so, like I said, matter of fact, but he's had time to think about it and he's not upset about it. So as an audience, you're just like that calibrates you nicely into the world of the film, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's got such a bizarre opening, hasn't it? Like, I forgot exactly how it opened, but it opens with this scene where this woman gets out of a car and shoots a horse and then gets back in her car. And you're like, what the hell is going on? And then that's never explained, but you get it after you know the premise of the film, that basically if you're single, you are put into a hotel where you are given 45 days to find a romantic partner. Otherwise, you will be turned into an animal of your choice. So it's such a crazy setup. But so that automatically gives you the context for that opening scene, where it's obviously a woman who's broken up with someone, or there's some sort of love thing going on which has turned sour, which has caused her to kill this horse, which is obviously like an ex-partner or something like that. That's what I assumed it was, but I mean, that's just one element of how bizarre this film is, and how it takes a while to get used to the world that it's sort of showing you.
It's a good tone setting and mood setting prologue that really doesn't make any sort of narrative sense until further down the line in the film, but it's more about tone and mood. And it's quite interesting, like on looking at it retrospectively, that it's essentially a crime of passion that she's committing, but it's presented quite dispassionately. And this is a film where there isn't a great deal of passion. We get to that in the final act of the film for David and the short-sighted woman, Rachel Weisz, but the passion is like conspicuously absent throughout most of the movie, which is about people partnering off and finding relationships. There's absolutely zero passion going on. So it's quite interesting to note that it is a crime of passion, presumably being committed by the unnamed woman in the prologue.
Yeah, and it's in the other dystopian films we've looked at, passion seems to be such a key component as well, because like if you look at the sort of the more hedonistic societies we've seen, like I always go back to A Brave New World, but of course there's been other ones like Logan's Run, and there's other ones in the mix, but they're all about that kind of like passion and free love. But then in the reverse scenario, you see when emotions are taken out and there's no love. So it's kind of like you get those two scenarios in most of the dystopias, but this is like a different kind of beast, isn't it? Because it's about monogamous relationships. So everybody has to be in this sort of cardboard cutout of a relationship. And it's so important to fit into the society that you are playing by the rules and you're doing what this society wants you to do, which is being a couple, basically.
That element is incredibly familiar in the kind of language of dystopia, isn't it? That you are forced to behave a certain way. We've seen that in almost every dystopia that we've looked at. What marks this one out as feeling odd is that where passion or love or whatever, where that factors into a dystopia, it's tended to be a byproduct of another control system that's being exercised by the dystopia, whereas in the Lobster, the dystopian society itself is built around romantic relationships. It seems to be the defining characteristic of the entire society as presented to us. So that immediately separates it out, I think, from any other real dystopian film we've seen, I think, that I can call to mind anyway.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that, isn't it? Because the way that they show such negativity towards being single, like anybody who has not got a partner is seen as like the enemy to these people in the society. And there's those amazing scenes where you've got the maid and one of the waiters, and they're on stage and they're going through these different scenarios, like what would happen if you haven't got a partner? You'll choke or you'll be raped when you're going home. And all of these like really mental scenarios, just because they're not coupled up.
Yeah, it's essentially, I mean, it's dystopian propaganda, isn't it? Again, something that we've seen all over. It's barely any different from the big poster of Big Brother saying Big Brother is watching. It's the exact same thing. They're kind of corralled into a big room and forced to watch this little play, reinforcing the societal idea of what's important, which is coupling up with a romantic partner. It's just another it's this film's version of dystopian propaganda.
It reminded me a bit of Never Let Me Go, because there was that scene in that, where they're acting out how to be in the society when they get out of the school, and how they should be when they order stuff from a cafe and things like that. So it's got that kind of element to it as well. And I mean, the look at the film was a bit like Never Let Me Go as well, in terms of sort of like the greyness to it, because it's all quite dull, and it also feels very sort of English as well.
English, British, Northern European, like certainly some of the landscapes. I couldn't tell. It was hard to tell where it felt like it was filmed. I think it was shot in Ireland or Wales.
It was shot in Ireland, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it could also easily be like a Scandinavian country. You know, some of the forests that we see. I don't know if that really plays into the plot, but there's a very important distinction between the geographies as well, isn't there? You've got the forest, the city, and sitting kind of vaguely in between as a guard post is the hotel. But you have those different geographies, all of which do feel, I mean, I think the forest feels generically European in its geography, but then you get into it feels very British in the hotel. And I don't know if we see enough of the city. To get a sense of where that felt like to me. But the hotel feels not just British, but a specific kind of like upper middle class British in the 70s to 80s, I guess.
Yeah, and it is that kind of like the tones that you see throughout the film, the sort of like the blues and the sort of like the darkness to it all. And that, in addition to the shots, which are mainly quite static, like there's not much tracking or anything like that. It's kind of like you're given a shot and everything's as muted as possible. Like everything is still, isn't it?
It's drab most of the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And again, that's an element of it, of a lack of passion in the society in the way it's shot and edited.
Yeah, it's that. And also like the repetitive nature of everything, because you get the same music playing throughout as well. So that it keeps coming back to that in the soundtrack. Like everything is kind of like, it's monotonous, and like with all of that going on, they've got this pressure on them, haven't they, to make these matches.
The music, that's a really interesting point, the kind of monotony of it, because there is a lot of repeated motifs in the music, but the music is actually one of the more passionate things about it. It's quite intense. I mean, intense is the word, psychologically intense. It's like Hitchcock music, but like throughout, constantly. But you're right, the kind of, there's so many repeated little beats and cycles in that music that it becomes intense in a different way. It becomes oppressive, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think the oppressive nature of it is so important, isn't it? Because that's what's happening. These people are oppressed by the rules that have been put on them, and like everything is very black and white, isn't it? So when they couple off, they're made to couple off with people which have similar attributes to them, it's not even similar interests all the time, is it? It's like similar characteristics, like the woman who's got the nosebleed, and then she ends up partnering up with Ben Whishaw, who doesn't have nosebleeds, but they couple up because of the nosebleeds, and everybody's got to have similar attributes.
Yeah, it is mostly attributes. You said it's not interests. I kind of feel like interests would count, but nobody in the hotel really has any interests to speak of, so it's like a moot point. I think like they could pair up based on shared interests. They don't have any interests, so they pair up based on shared attributes. It doesn't matter. Like it's the kind of superficiality of pairing up that I think that if they ever did have a shared interest, that would count. You know, they'd be perfectly happy to pair up based on that. But they're also sort of soulless and lifeless, that they don't have much of an interest. Or I guess, you know, Ashley Jensen's character has an interest in biscuits, you could say, and no one else shares her interest for biscuits, and she ends up throwing herself out of the building. But But it's this incredibly bleak superficiality of the interests / attributes that if you meet someone with any commonality to you, that is tantamount to a lightning bolt of falling in love, you know?
Yeah.
When swimming breaststroke, men shouldn't wear swim shorts, as it really limits movement in the buttocks. But you knew that, didn't you?
I think your nose is bleeding.
Really? Oh, no. This happens to me all the time. It's really, really annoying.
I know. I have a nosebleed problem too.
Because, yeah, as soon as David meets the short-sighted woman, he's like, oh, I'm short-sighted too. That, like, now we've got something in common. And that makes him think, right, this is a relationship. And before that, he's tried to, like, he's faked it in the other relationships he's been trying to start up. Like, there's that horrendous woman who is just, like, evil incarnate. Who kills the dog, who is his brother. And it's like in a very brutal way. And just this sort of like the callous nature of her. And then him trying to fake that. Like there's the hilarious scene on the beach when he's talking to the other couple and their fake daughter. And he like kicks her in the shin or something and says like, it's just moments like that where he's trying to fit in and trying to forcibly be in this couple and be the way that society wants him to be. It's very funny, but it's also very sad that he has to do that.
I think it's a very good metaphor because the metaphor is very unsubtle about how you may, change your behaviour in order to try and force a relationship for the sake of societal pressure. But that metaphor is not very subtle. But then bringing out the humour of that by taking it to quite an unpleasant extreme where David is putting himself in a situation where he will kick a little girl just to like impress a woman he doesn't even like, to hold down a relationship that he probably doesn't really want just because he doesn't want to get turned into an animal, which again is a threat that is not seen much in the film. It doesn't actually come to pass. It's just looming over everyone. It's a MacGuffin, isn't it? The changing people into animals. It's recasting the fear of being alone. Basically, is actually what's propelling society. It's recasting that with arbitrarily being turned into an animal, I think.
Yeah, because you don't see it very much. You see it a few times in the film. Like there's that one moment where the blonde woman gets turned into a horse.
Well, no, I mean, she leaves and then a horse arrives.
Yeah, but the horse specifically has long blonde mane of hair like her. And yeah, so it's definitely the same, supposed to be that woman. I'm not doubting the internal reality. I believe that the characters in the film are turned into animals by a fantastical process, but it's the fact that it's completely off screen. Certainly the transformation, and we see very few characters. So yeah, okay, there is the horse who we see briefly, and there is David's dog who is his brother. Yeah, and there's like camels in the woods. The camel was the first thing I was thinking of. Yeah, I quite like that because there's quite an escalation, isn't there? There's like a peacock, but it's like, well, we're in Britain or Ireland, be a peacock here, and lots of rabbits and stuff like that. And then as soon as you get the camel, that was a good moment, I thought. Yeah, definitely. And you're right. It's this kind of like, but it is this ticking time clock of like having to get into a relationship in those 45 days you're in the hotel, and that adds to the jeopardy for David's character and everybody else there. And it does, again, you've talked about sort of like the way that it's talking in metaphors and stuff. Like there is a very real thing in society where if you're not coupled up in a relationship at a certain age, and the older you get, the sort of like you're supposed to be married with kids at a certain point in your life. And it's like all of these kind of societal things which are being reflected in this ticking time clock of having to basically turn into an animal if you don't meet your right partner in the amount of time that you've got.
Yeah, I have to say this film came out the year I met my wife, and I'm quite glad I've seen it now afterwards, you know. Like,
yeah.
But it's because it's very relatable, the kind of like being late 20s, early 30s and just being grouped together with people and trying to find a reason to get along with them, you know? Like,
yeah, it is exactly that, isn't it? It's
got these horrifying implications to it, but they're very relatable and realistic.
Yeah, and I think that's why the film works, isn't it? Because it is this sort of like localized dystopia for these people, and all of that feeds into why you relate to David's character so much, because he, like, you see the other people in the hotel, and a lot of them they've been in relationships, they've been married, or they've lost partners, and then they find themselves back in the hotel, and they've got this 45 days again to partner up, and just like the intense pressure the society is putting on them to do it, and also the sort of like the way that it leads to them, like you said, there's no passion, there's no emotion, there's no connection with these people. They are partnering up just for the sake of partnering up because there's a time limit.
Yeah, and then if you do partner up, you'll be examined under the microscope, you'll be judged, and we're gonna check if your relationship's good enough, basically. And again, that it's this use of very unsubtle metaphors that's then underscored with some very black comedy works very well, because when that relationship doesn't work out, you're given a child, not just a baby, you're given like a 10-year-old little girl. Yeah. Because hey, now you're gonna have to force it, you're gonna have to get along because there's a kid on the scene who is sort of equally weird and dispassionate and talks in this detached way.
Yeah, and they all talk in that detached way, don't they? There's something in the language of the way that they're talking to each other. It's very matter of fact, isn't it? And like it's an interesting thing because you like we say, the emotion's been taken out, the passion in their day-to-day life's gone. So even the way they communicate is very like, there's that moment when John C. Reilly goes to Colin Farrell, have you seen my mate's leg? There's just like no emotion in it or anything. It's just like, oh, there's your leg. And
yeah, I'm trying to even think of like scenes where they talk about how they feel about something, because David tries to bond with the girl with the nice hair, but even that he states that she has nice hair, and she says, I know. Like it's a fact. I have nice hair. She has nice hair. Like there's very little emotion there. Does he sort of try and get out of her, like, what do you think about my hair? Like he's sort of inviting an emotional, or even just like an opinion rather than a fact. And she just sort of goes off on one about he's not bald, but there's a possibility that he may be bald later because he can't rule it out. Yeah,
and he's trying to look for that attribute, isn't he, that will match them up. Like, oh, my hair might be all right. Like, is this a thing?
Yeah. He's not. Yeah, you're right. He's inviting an emotional reaction, but not particularly deliberately. He is just still searching for a common attribute. Yeah, just literally anything to bond over.
Yeah, and even the way that they're listed in the cast credits, because no one's given a proper name other than David.
No, some of them do. There's there's a John. I think Ben Whishaw is John, and I think John C. Reilly's character has a name, but I can't remember what it is, because I think David addresses him by his name.
Yeah, but it feels like a lot of them are sort of just put down to their attributes again. And I mean, even though he's got a name like it's David or like John, as you say, there's like, they're very boring British names. They're very like David, John.
Oh wow! Apologies to the Davids, Johns.
No, but it's
listening.
Like you know exactly what I mean, though. Like it's that, and then you've got like Biscuit Woman and like the Short-Sighted Woman and all this kind of stuff. It's very like, it's very simple and to the point, and there's no excitement in any part of the film. And I mean, even the bits like everything's so mechanical in this world. Like even the like bizarre moments where so David has to, all of the males in this hotel have to sit there and get like some sort. It's not even a lap dance, is it? Off of these, off the maid.
God.
She just rubs her arse on his crotch and then leaves. Yeah, it's just like all this weird stuff. It's very mechanical.
It's a very good, bleakly comic performance from Colin Farrell, where he's begging for it not to happen, but not like hands and knees, very emotional begging.
Yeah.
He's just like, he's pleading and saying like, please let's not do this. It's awful. And then she does it and he goes, that was awful.
He goes, that was awful. Could you not do it for a bit longer?
Yeah. No, I think he says it the other way around, because he asks if it can go on for a bit longer, and when it doesn't,
And that's
why it's
so
awful. Yeah, because it stops.
Please take off your trousers and sit on the bed.
Can we not do this today? It's awful.
I know. But I'm afraid we have to do it. And you have no idea how much it helps you psychologically in your search for a partner. Lie down. Spread your legs. More.
The sex scene as well. I think there's a couple of sex scenes when he's paired up with the horrible woman. What's her name? Like, how's she identified? The monstrous woman or something like that.
Heartless woman.
Right. Yeah. The heartless woman. There's at least one sex scene, and again, it's one of the least passionate sex scenes ever, I think, and I feel like we've had a few in this series in these dystopias. It's grim, but a lot of those grim things in this film, like the grimness carries a lot of comedy with it in a very bleak way, but it has a very good sense of humour, this film. It's got a GSOH, this film could put that on its dating profile and then meet another film that shared that attribute and then pair off,
Yeah, it's that kind of thing, isn't it? And it's like, you talked about the sex scenes. There's a scene where Rachel Weisz is talking about having sex with David.
Yeah.
And she's got like this very vivid monologue almost about how she pictures them in a house, and it's like lots of lead up to it, and then she goes, and then he fucks me up the arse. And it takes you aback, because it's like, that's her thinking in a passionate way of like her fantasies, and you don't really see that throughout the film. That's why, like, that's just quite a shocking bit in a film anyway, just hearing Rachel Weisz say that out of nowhere. But because everything is so sort of like mechanical and drab, her saying that just speaks volumes.
Yeah, and in that kind of that flat effect that she uses for the narration. What did you think of the fact that it was narrated? Because there's a moment halfway through where the narration flips that took me by surprise, actually, which is where Rachel Weisz starts saying, when he escapes from the hotel, Rachel Weisz says, and he came to us. And I didn't realise that this was being narrated by a character in the film at that point. And I think also when he's turning the heartless woman into an animal, I think that's the first time, because she says, I tried to get it out of him. What animal did you turn her into? That really took me aback. What did you think about the kind of first half narration and then the change and what you learn about her?
I think having the narration in from the start kind of gives it this almost fairy tale kind of aspect to it a little bit as well. Like like Rachel Weisz is recounting this bizarre tale, this strange story, and then when it becomes her diary entries later on, and you realise that's what it is, that's when it kind of flips. And again, it's like it's got elements of like 1984 in that.
Yeah. But you don't know it's an element of 1984 until halfway through, because like narration can have this incredibly personalizing effect on the characters when it's first person narration. When a main character is narrating a film, then you really feel like you're inside their head. You're listening to their thoughts as a viewer, so it really like aligns you with them on a kind of mental internal level. But in this film, that is what's happening in this film, but you don't find that out until halfway. So I found it it added to the sense of alienation. It made David and all the other characters seem like laboratory subjects, like someone's reporting on scientific findings very coldly and matter-of-factly, as everyone does. But it adds this layer of distancing. But then, weirdly, by the end of the film, you come all the way back round and you realise you are listening to a very personal account of one of the main characters.
Yeah, and as soon as you see Rachel Weisz in the film, after hearing her all that time, you identify with her character straight away. You know she's important.
Yeah, because it's Rachel Weisz, and you suddenly realise. Like, I didn't clock her voice, but as soon as I see her face, I was like, oh, that I know whose voice that is that's been narrating it the whole time.
Yeah, so you're instantly on her side, and also just like, you know that she's going to have a connection with David as well, because she's been talking about him for the entire film and we just haven't known why or what's going on.
Again, going back to what you said about a fairy tale, it creates this kind of romantic feeling of destiny between the two characters. The feeling isn't quite there, but it's got a sense of that. It's like a hollowed out sense of that kind of trope that you suddenly realise these characters are destined to meet and possibly destined to be together, but only in the sense that she's been telling his story until he gets to her.
And I think, because there is that sense of like destiny about it, and that's different from the way that all the other relationships are made to seem like they have to be matched off, they have to do this, and it's very like structured, and whereas their meeting is completely organic, whereas everything else is rules. Like, it's all about the things that you have to do in order to fit into society. And again, we've got this dehumanization stuff happening again. The key word for dystopias. It's this sort of uniformity of everyone in the hotel. Like, everyone's wearing the same clothes. They're doing the same things. They're having the same meals. It's all just the same thing again and again. And then, so you've got all of those rules for the people in the hotel. And then you've got, when you finally see the loners, who are like the kind of like the rebels, the people which are against the society, they've got rules which are just as strict as the people in the society. So it's all rule based. There's nobody being free other than perhaps David and the short-sighted woman.
Yeah, and weirdly, David suddenly becomes like an incredibly successful hotel guest when he arrives in a society that completely inverts the rules of the hotel. Like, if he'd only met the short-sighted woman, they would have instantly connected over the fact that they're both short-sighted, and he would have gone on the boat and talked about what glasses prescription he gets, and and got a fantastic assessment and all of that. But he's unfortunately found himself in the complete opposite dystopian society that where God Almighty, where any like act of intimacy is punishable by some like really horrific violence. We see, is it called the red kiss?
Yeah, the red kiss, and then they talk about
the red
intercourse.
Yeah. Oh. Which is kept off screen, but the narrator makes it very, very clear how scared she is. Using quite emotional language, still in the flat effect, but saying, God, I'm so scared, so scared of that, or something like that.
Yeah, this threat of violence from like even flirting is considered like you can't flirt, you can't be in any sort of romantic conversation with anyone. It has to be very much like, you are a loner, you are one of the loners, so you have to be on your own. What did you think about the leader of the loners? Like, what did you think of her character?
She's brilliant. She's so scary.
Yeah, but I was quite interested in her, like, why she is a loner and why she's there. Because there's also something about sexuality that they don't really talk about in the film. Like, they talk about the bisexual option in the hotel, and
the fact that it's not an option.
Yeah, it's not an option. It was too complicated for them logistically or something, some bullshit like that. So they're like, no.
That's a great little dystopian moment, though, isn't it? To just sort of completely, like you're free in your sexuality, but actually one whole sexuality it's administratively difficult. So we're just society is just drawing a line through the entire of bisexuality because Yeah, because it's just like we can't do it on the form or something ridiculous like that. But like, again, being gay or straight in the hotel doesn't mean anything, because you're not going to make any kind of connection with someone of the same sex or someone of the opposite sex. You're just going to connect over attributes. Do they like wearing hats or whatever? You know?
Yeah, exactly that. But I felt like, going back to the loner leader, I felt maybe she was bisexual, because there's moments where she is sort of like looking at David and there's like something there. And then there's also moments when she's looking at Rachel Weisz and like even the maid as well. Like there's something going on there. And then I thought maybe because she can't fit into that other world, she feels like she has to become like ostracized in this outcasted group and be a loner because her sexuality is not recognized. I don't know if I was reading way too much into it, but that was the kind of thought that I was having when I was watching her character.
I think, yeah, it's an interesting theory. I found her very hard to read in that way.
Yeah.
Like, what doesn't quite track there is if she kind of ran away because she was a bisexual and that's not allowed in the hotel, why would she then seemingly outlaw any kind of sex? So she couldn't then express herself as a bisexual, because it seems like those are her rules. She seems to be the one most invested in enforcing them.
Yeah, I suppose it could be some sort of repression maybe that's sort of like influencing that. Like, if I can't have the things that I want, then no one else can have them. So these are the rules. So it could be something like that. But it's like, either way, it's so interesting that this outcasted group have just as many rules as the people in the other society.
And then David and the short-sighted woman have to create their own rules, which is their comically elaborate sign language that they create, like lying down on my front, kneeling up, 2 hands behind my back, all of this stuff. They react. It's an expression of passion. It's kind of the first. It's stepping stones into seeing real passion in the film. Is how they create their own language, love language, as a reaction to the rules imposed on them.
Yeah, and there's something about the fact that it's secretive and it's their own special code, and the ridiculous nature of it is what really highlights just how dark this world is, and the sort of comedy aspects of it, because they are literally just dancing around almost, and to everybody else it's obvious there's something going on because they're doing all these weird things, but yet it's the only way that they can communicate. And again, it's like they are building a connection with something more than just their common interest, because they're having conversations with each other and they're building up their relationship, even though it's in this like very weird way.
Yeah, and they do seem to genuinely build up a real relationship. But then David seems like he can't escape the shallow attribute connection system that they live under. Because after the incredibly cruel event where the short-sighted woman is blinded by the leader character, he reverts back to just searching through her character to try and find something else that they have in common, which is not short-sightedness. And it continues like to the very end of the film, and is left unresolved whether or not he's able to escape that overarching societal oppression that you have to like share attributes. It's unclear whether he's escaped that mentality at the end of the film.
Yeah, because in his head, the fact that she's blind and he's not, that's taken away the common thing that they have, their short-sightedness, but it's also made her possibly incompatible for him in the eyes of society, which is bizarre because they built up such a relationship beforehand.
Oh, that's an interesting take. Yeah, I hadn't really considered that. So there's also the possibility that he's considering blinding himself just to keep them safe, because they're sort of they're illegal now, aren't they? Because although I don't really understand why, they're a couple, they should sort of be allowed back in the city. But I think it's implied that wouldn't pass. Yeah, you're right. There's an element of he might actually just be doing it. He might be considering doing it because it will keep them safe, because they'll be a convincing couple again in society's eyes, rather than he's looking for a connection. Maybe I read it a little bit wrong there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can read it either way though, can't you? Because it's very ambiguous, that ending, as to whether he's going to do it or not, and also like what his reasons are for it, because you can't properly track exactly what's going on there. But you mentioned about sort of like them having to fit in to the society, and like there's those scenes in the mall or the shopping centre, as we'd say, or something like that, and they're being like harassed by the security staff, which are checking to see if they're loners, if they live out in the woods, and just that kind of like enforcement of the state as well, that kind of like police state almost that they've got, and like, have you got your marriage license or whatever they're looking for? So again, they've got to have the right certificate, and they've got to be able to prove that they are in a relationship, and that's how they can get along in the world.
Yeah, again, it's a very familiar dystopian trope, isn't it? The overbearing police force that can interrupt anything you're doing and demand to see papers, to see that you're valid and fit into society. But again, just laser focused on this single issue dystopia, and that is whether or not you're in a relationship. And it's interesting because it's not, we talked about the kids being assigned. It's not, there could be links here to like Children of Men and Handmaid's Tale, infertility, coupling up for reasons of fertility. It's got nothing to do with that. Like some of these people they're fine to not have kids, and it's part of his ruse when he's in the city, as he's talking about how, even if we didn't have kids, we'd still be deliriously happy together because I love her so much. Society's pressure to get in a relationship has nothing to do with any sense of procreation. That's not an element of it. It is just be in a relationship or get the hell out of our society.
Yeah, Jesus, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But I love the fact there's no explanation as well. There's there's no reason for why they would get turned into animals, really, or what the reasons are for any of this. But that's what it is.
That's what I mean about the animal transformation being a complete MacGuffin, because you're not invited to wonder about why they have to be transformed, and you're not really invited to wonder about why they have to be coupled up. But why they have to be coupled up is a much more interesting question than why they have to be transformed. It's very clear that animal transformation is just the punishment. It's a punishment, and it's the punishment that this society's gone with. To me anyway, it just didn't matter why it was animal transformation, and that all of that just felt like incredibly, secondary to the point.
Yeah, it just like added like a nice little extra element, I felt. Even the fact that it's a lobster, and then lobster's supposed to be, they mate for life, don't they? There's that saying, it's from some show, I can't remember what it is.
Is it? I think because he says that they are fertile their entire life. But I don't think he lists mating for life as one of... Well, it's not one of David's interests if they do mate for life.
There's definitely something like...
on Friends.
You're looking for your lobster.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, they're going with that, aren't they, to an extent?
I'm not sure if Friends is a reliable source of zoological information or not, but
hey, I mean, it works for the film, so...
But according to the lobster, they're fertile for life anyway, so...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they're blue-blooded, which is a bonus.
I didn't know that, yeah. What does that mean? Does that... They don't literally have blue blood, right? I don't know anything about lobsters.
I mean, I don't know either. That is, bizarre.
Like a Vulcan, James.
Like a Vulcan.
Or do they have green blood? Oh, the listeners are going to be mad at me if I've got that wrong.
Now, have you thought of what animal you'd like to be if you end up alone?
Yes, a lobster.
Why a lobster?
Because lobsters live for over 100 years. Are blue-blooded, like aristocrats. And stay fertile all their lives.
Come on, you guys. It's a known fact that lobsters fall in love and mate for life. And you know what? You can actually see old lobster couples walking around their tank, holding claws.
Yeah, very, very crazy film, but I enjoy it a lot because it's got the dark comedy side, it's got the dark dystopian elements to it, but it's the fact it is such a personal dystopian story, and it's all about the relationships and how these characters are trying to fit into the society, but also find love, aren't they? Like, they want to couple up, even though there is all this threat of becoming an animal if you don't.
Yeah, well, I question that last point. I wonder how much any of them are actually interested in finding love. I think David might want to, but I think most of the people in that hotel are just acting out of fear.
Yeah, they get to a point where they're like, it's got to happen, or else I'm going to turn into a camel.
By your own choice.
Yeah. Okay, final question on this film. What animal would you be turned into?
Oh, I think a dolphin might be a good answer because they seem to have a lot of fun, but dolphins freak me out. Dolphins kind of freak me out a little bit, so I don't know if I'd want to be a dolphin.
I never thought about them before because they have a lot of fun.
Well, they're like one of the few animals that do activities for pleasure. Like humans. But maybe a horsey. Just run around like a nice big horsey.
Lovely.
What about you?
Lovely. I was trying to think about this and I was like, oh, maybe I'd be something like a big bear or something. But then I was like, no,
cool,
actually,
yeah.
I was like, I'd quite like to fly.
Sure.
So I'd probably be like an eagle or something. I don't know.
I definitely want to be a mammal because of the higher brain functions. You know?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'd probably just get saddled with being a pigeon or something.
Pigeon. I mean, dream big, James. You don't have to be a pigeon.
That's what I'd say.
You can be an eagle. I'm not trying to
like,
talk you down.
I'd be like, no, I think I should be a pigeon. Yeah. I mean, I'd be quite sad if I was living in this dystopia anyway, so might as well just be a pigeon. You know where there's usually lots of pigeons?
On a high rise?
On a high rise!
Very good.
Oh,
Very
what
good.
a great segue into the next film.
And there's a horse in it. Shall we start talking about Ben Wheatley's High Rise?
Let's do it.
James, have you seen the new film Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Yes, I have seen it everywhere all at once.
I know you have, mate, because we talked about it recently and I've seen it too, and we had a very nice time talking about it over on our Patreon, didn't we?
Patreon plug!
If you want to check that out and support the show, you can head on over to patreon.com/journey through sci-fi to listen to that episode and loads more that we've been putting out over there.
Yes, do that. It's a very fun film to chat about. I'm hoping you've all seen it. That we talk about goggly eyes, dildo nunchucks, sausage fingers, lots of stuff going on in that. So yeah, if you're interested in some bonus material, then come and check out the Patreon feed.
For all its inconveniences, Lang was satisfied with life in the high-rise, ready to move forward and explore life. How exactly? He had not yet decided.
I'm so sorry.
I'll survive.
I thought you were empty.
I just moved in.
You're an excellent specimen. Why don't you come up later and have a drink?
You don't know how things work around here, do you?
I'm a fast learner.
So High Rise, also from 2015, these films both coming out in the same year and directed by Ben Wheatley. What do you think of Ben Wheatley, James?
I like Ben Wheatley. He's got some good films.
I'm scared and intimidated by Ben Wheatley.
Yeah, I get that impression as well.
I think he's a brilliant filmmaker, but I wouldn't go for a pint with him. I don't even think I'd want to be in a room with him. I think he'd be really scary.
Our mate Mike, I think, has actually gone for a pint with him before.
Oh, really? Okay.
How did it go? I think he might have even had dinner with him or something like that.
I imagine dinner with Ben Wheatley would be like dinner with Hannibal Lecter. I don't know anything about him. I'm basing this on his films. I've not even watched interviews with him. He might just be a really nice guy.
His films they've always got this dark touch. I mean, if you think of Kill List and Sightseers and like A Field in England, they've all got that kind of tinge of darkness to them.
Tinge?
Just a tinge.
Kill List is one of the most unsettling films I've ever seen, and I was unsettled for days after watching it. And none of his other films that I've seen are that unsettling, but they've all got the tinge. Yeah, maybe it's just a tinge.
Sightseers has got the tinge,
definitely, with a lot of humour. It pairs well with. It pairs well with Lobster because it's unsettling and weird and creepy, but with a dark sense of humour throughout, and that does carry over through a lot of his films. Not so much Kill List, but definitely Sightseers, and there's some humour in A Field in England as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely the case with this because, again, this is very surreal. The theme of today's episode is post-modern dystopias. This feels like that kind of world, isn't it? And it's based on the book by J.G. Ballard of the same name, High Rise, from 1975, and it's all about this world where it's basically in the 70s. It's like a parallel 70s world, isn't it? Like,
yeah, I have to say I didn't get that the first time I watched it, but it was much more apparent on a rewatch that this is this actually could just be taking place in a relatively straightforward 1970s. Not even parallel, to be honest, because of the way the building works. Aside from the fact that maybe there wasn't a building this large and as self-contained. I don't know when they became a thing in this country, but yeah, it doesn't feel futuristic. It just feels like it could have happened, and as the way it's presented the film, it could have happened and nobody on the outside would know about it, or wouldn't know for months later.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of the film, isn't it? Because it's so segregated, this luxury apartment building, this high rise where everything is set. And I think both the film and the novel look at how mankind becomes reliant on sort of modern conveniences and machines to an extent. That's kind of what I got from it. Like, it's this luxury apartment where everything you could need is there. You've got a supermarket, you've got a gym, you've got a swimming pool, you've got like all of the amenities are at your disposal. It's like a Mega City 1 kind of apartment building, isn't it?
Yeah, I was definitely reminded of Dread, the sort of single location tower block. But the difference is that there was that was necessitated by the poverty of the people who lived there, although there was like a stratification up to the top. Whereas this is ostensibly a much more well-to-do block of flats, isn't it? Even the poorest on the bottom are, they're quite well off. These are middle class people. This is an expensive place to live. So it's kind of this mirror world of the block we see in Dread.
Yeah, I think that's really important as well. The fact that it is like lower to upper middle class people, and then like you've got the higher up, the rich people at the top of the block, but there's no working class people really, are there? You don't see anyone below lower middle class in this block because it's a luxury apartment building, so you wouldn't have people which couldn't afford to live there.
Yeah, but as we see through the film, those on the bottom get pushed and pushed down and down, and the nature of the hierarchy, they're the lowest rung of this particular ladder. So the ones higher up take advantage of that basically, and get quite abusive, get horrible.
Yeah, and it's just the idea of this luxury apartment building and it being so segregated, and you think about how segregated people are sort of like now, especially after the pandemic as well. You've got everything that you can do everything from your home now. Lots of people work from home. There's the internet, there's machines. You can order stuff online. You don't necessarily have to leave your space as much as you did previously. And this book was written in 1975, and it's sort of like it had that idea that like, what if you just lived in this apartment building and it had everything you wanted, so you never had to leave. I feel like it's even more relevant today with everything we've been through, and I was just quite struck by that watching it again sort of recently for the podcast.
Yeah, and the premise being that if you existed in that world, would it work, basically, I guess is the question. And existing in that world means that a tower block becomes a city or a country unto itself, not beholden to any rules of law outside or rules of, societal rules that may exist in the outside world. It can just sort of culturally implode, I guess, is what's happening in the film, isn't it?
Yeah, and they create their own sort of culture around it, don't they? Like there's parties and there's socializing, and everybody in the apartment block like mixes with each other, don't they? There's lots of stuff going on and they're all friendly. And Like, that doesn't seem like many apartment blocks that I know of. I feel like a lot of places people do kind of keep to themselves. But in this high rise, the society is forming around these groups and everybody's sort of grouping up.
Yeah, because those parties, do they mix? I can't remember. I feel like the parties are more localized to like an area. Like you might mix with, Lang. Well, Lang's a bad example because he kind of mixes up and down the tower. But other characters, I think, will mix maybe with the floor above, floor below. Early in the film, there's that kind of level of mixing, and then that gets compressed as the film goes on, and the groups they belong to become smaller and more tribal and more aggressive towards each other.
I think even that mixing is sort of like, it seems like maybe it was something more present in the past, like if you think about sort of like the 50s, and it felt like they'd do like street parties and things like that, and there'd be more of a sense of community, whereas like now it doesn't seem like you would have that kind of community around your neighbours in the same way.
No, I hate socialising with my neighbours.
Yeah, but like in this world, like it's just such an interesting idea of a dystopia, isn't it? Just the fact that they're almost trapped with each other, but it's out of choice as well. And
yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's a good little Ben Wheatley thing where something's happening and it just feels like it makes no sense, and it feels like it makes you feel like you're going crazy watching it, and it's a horror movie element as well, isn't it? Because it kind of makes you want to scream at the characters, just leave, just get out, just leave.
Yeah,
everyone's going crazy, you don't have to stay there, just go. But that's explicitly, or rather implicitly, not an option. That it doesn't appear to cross anyone's mind. I think there is a character who, because the newsreader must still be leaving because we see him on TV when everything's gone to pot. He still appears on TV, so he's leaving. But it seems like no one else leaves. I mean, the doors are barricaded, aren't they? They're defending the barricades, so it's not an option to leave.
Yeah, and I mean, you see all of that chaos. You see like what the high rise will descend into by the end of the film at the start, don't you? You see, you see like you see Tom Hiddleston roasting a dog leg at the beginning. You know that this is where it's going to end up, and it's just seeing that, and then seeing the fresh look of the apartment, when he moves in, he's got the boxes there, and he's got like the plush coffee set, and everything's very shiny, and like the lift's very shiny, and but then slowly everything deteriorates as it goes on, which is such a lovely touch, and the kind of like descent into anarchy that's going on. And I mean, all of that's mirrored in the sort of like the camera work as well. Like you've got like this big sort of shiny shot to the beginning, everything looks clean, and then later on it gets more frantic and handheld, and you've got that switch happening.
Yeah. I don't even think it's particularly slow either, the descent. I found it quite rapid. There's like a very specific turning point over the swimming pool. There's tension, and there's a sort of suggestion of some deterioration of societal mores before that, but the piling into the swimming pool when they're supposedly not supposed to do that, that's the kind of tipping point, I thought, where from that point, that's, I don't know, a third of the way into the film, and then the middle third is a very steady but quite speedy decline into total chaos, where this self-contained city or country just gives up on any sense of law and order, and it just becomes like not even martial law, just
it's just an absolute free-for-all, isn't it? It goes crazy, and like it starts really like, it starts in a slow way where it's like a few things stop working, like, and there's piles of rubbish building up, and then bit by bit things get darker, and literally to the point where they're running around and there's places which are burning and people being killed and raped, and it goes into like a weird kind of like almost hedonistic society as well, because everybody is doing what they want all of the time. And like the supermarket becomes this place where everybody's grabbing what they can, whereas before it was this shiny place where even like it reminded me of Repo Man as well. The way that all of the sort of like the food is labelled up as like bran flakes and something like that, and it is what it is. It's very simple.
Yeah, I don't know if that was just 70s branding, because they've got Chubb. It's Chubb dog food, isn't it? Which is a real brand, I think. Remember that from my youth. I don't know if it's around anymore. But what you just said about they descend into hedonism and they just they do whatever they want with their parties and debauchery. That's kind of the promise of the high rise in the first place, isn't it? The being able to provide you with a supermarket on site. We've got swimming pools, we've got tennis courts, blah blah blah. We've got all the amenities. The whole point is like you move here so you can do whatever you want. You've got this freedom, apparent freedom to do whatever you want, but then there's rolling blackouts. The rubbish chutes don't quite work. Things aren't quite up to scratch. But these people have this urge. So it's kind of, I think it's there in their collective consciousness before things fall apart. They want to act on their base instincts. That's why they've moved there, I think. And things falling apart and the services that they expect not working quite right emboldens them to just lash out and become quite animalistic in their behaviour.
Yeah, they're reverting back to their base instincts, whereas before there's a term that gets thrown around in the film, biorobots.
Yeah,
which
I didn't know what to make of that. What did you think of that?
I was trying to figure it out, and it's kind of like, for me, it's about the dehumanization elements again. So they're biorobots because they are just going along their days and everything's automated for them. Like everything around them is automated. Like it's very mechanical the way they're living. So it's almost like Metropolis, where you've got the workers just acting in that machine way, and the people in this society are acting in this kind of machine way because they're just doing things, but they don't know how to fix anything as well because none of them have those capabilities. Everything's just given to them, so they're just following their programming. So I think that's kind of what I got from it. But I just found it such a interesting term, like biorobot.
Yeah, it was. It's quite intruding when you hear it because it stands out in the language a little bit, doesn't it? Forces you to sort of acknowledge it and think about it. Even though I didn't. I think you're on the right track. I didn't know what to make of it, to be honest.
But yeah, it seems like a kind of like a throwaway line as well. And obviously, there's so much going on in the film, just in general. It's so surreal. It's kind of hard to latch onto too much of what's going on because you've got Lang and his relationship with the woman upstairs, and then he strikes up relationships with other characters, and it's quite a lot going on with the relationships of people and just like how everybody's navigating those within the high rise.
Yeah, it's very gossipy as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it Sienna Miller's character? Is that the one that he's sleeping
Charlotte.
with? Yeah, Charlotte. She sort of, what does she say? The walls have ears or something like that. Like, that's a very gossipy neighbour thing to say, isn't it? Like, while talking about something incredibly personal about his sister dying, that sort of level of gossip is very invasive, and that's how we're kind of introduced to that element of it. But that carries on throughout, doesn't it? Because even when things have broken down, people are still gossiping. Like the architect and his party goers are gossiping about like a guy coming to kill them, basically. Like, what are we going to do about this guy? He's crazy. Like, like it still has that gossipy tone to how they're talking and talking about like the parties that are going on. I'm in charge of this party,
Yes, I'm afraid I'm not very good at this sort of thing.
Slotting you mean?
Yes, I was rather expecting to find a certain kind of anonymity.
Don't worry, people don't usually care what happens 2 floors above or below them. Good. Charlotte's different. She's on all sorts of committees. She said your tenancy application was very Byronic.
Is she really? Well, I'm determined to get everything right.
Yeah, it's that, and the way that they talk about each other as well. It's very sort of like, it's very sideswipey. Like when Lang gets to the top floor and he's at this party where everyone is dressed up in sort of in period costume, and he's just there in his suit. He stands out, and everybody like ridicules him for that, because it's like, oh, how could you not have known that this is what was happening? And there's something about the fact that they are dressed like aristocrats as well.
Yeah, and the architect is called Royal as well.
Yeah, adds that extra element. So it's like the people higher up are higher up because of their station, and that feeds down, doesn't it, into the rest of the groups, because then the people lower down are having a worse time of it because their amenities are dying off first. Yeah. And then eventually it goes up to the higher floors.
But it's seemingly arbitrary, the sort of who gets on the higher floors. They dress them up as aristocrats, but I wasn't clear on their sort of placement in society. Certainly for Royal and his wife, he's clearly wealthy. Seems to own, or he has some authority over the whole building, which in the context of the film is basically the whole world. So he's the ruler of the world. But apart from the fact that other characters around him work for him and are basically his lackeys, there's not much reason for them to be in power. And Lang's student Monroe is a good example of that, because Lang has this sort of position of authority over him at the start of the film at the hospital. But then when Monroe realizes that Lang's on a lower floor than him, the power dynamic just completely flips, and Lang has to like be duplicitous to get power over him. But I didn't see any other sort of social indicators as to why Monroe would be, more well off, more higher up in the hierarchy, other than he just happens to live up there.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Just sort of like how that shapes their dynamics in work as well. And even just like there's that amazing bit where they're like, Lang says to Wilder, I can't give you a lift because I don't remember where my car is.
Yeah.
And just the sheer amount of people that are living in this high rise, you get a grasp of it then, because there's so many cars everywhere. But then the fact that all the cars stay there and everybody ends up not leaving the high rise as well kind of like feeds into that as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we get the mirroring shots later on in the film where we see just a handful of cars remain, and they're all kind of like burned out, smashed up wrecks with trash strewn everywhere, because they're just like piling up bin bags because they've got no infrastructure to speak of, basically. And it just becomes this kind of like post-apocalyptic wasteland, so in the immediate outside, which only serves to like create more of a sense of distance. It all just mirrors a sense of like an isolated city or country, doesn't it? Because that's the kind of wasteland that exists outside the high rise. So, well, we can't go out. That might be one of the motivations as to why they don't consider going out, because if you do look out the window, it doesn't look very nice. It doesn't look very like a safer place to go.
And it's kind of almost, it becomes like anti-societal a little bit, in the way that it's built so much on like everybody doing what they are supposed to do and living on their floors and doing that. And then as soon as people start breaking that barrier down, then it slowly becomes more like us and them. And then it's everybody trying to get to the top floor, because they know the top floor is where everything is. They've got the amazing garden and the horse, like we talked about a minute ago. Like there's a horse just roaming around on the top floor of this high rise. It's just so grandiose compared to what the other people have.
Yeah, and you're talking about them kind of like forming their little tribes on their floors. There is you can draw a line to the Lobster as well, can't you? Because they're forming these arbitrary bonds with people. They just happen to share a floor with them, but that's tribal enough that they can then group together and trust each other and take up arms against anyone who comes from another floor.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting, Lang's character in particular, amongst all of these different tribes, because he can kind of like maneuver around all the different floors. And he's kind of like this weird kind of class where I don't know if it's because he's a little bit slimy, maybe. Like there's just something about him that he can kind of like he can hang with the people on the top floor and sort of make friends with Royal and do all of that, but then he can also be best mates with the guys at the like lower floors. So I think there's just something interesting about how he navigates his way around.
Yeah, it's interesting you think he's slimy and not charming. I'm not too sure which one he's supposed to be out of those two. It's a very fine line.
I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? Because he does like, I don't know, like obviously I think you relate to his character a bit more the fact that he's lost his sister, hasn't he? And he's talking about that. But then even then, I don't know, there's just something about him which is a bit off.
But his ability to, basically, he's a social climber, but he's able to relate to anyone on that social hierarchy. But that doesn't work in the high rise because of the trajectory of what happens. That might be considered a useful sort of social skill in the real world, but it doesn't serve him particularly well. Or it does serve him particularly well, actually, I guess, because he gets attacked less, I guess, because Royal sees him as useful because he can do a lobotomy in a pinch, but other people trust him as well, so he doesn't get battered around too much. He does a little bit, but so actually, I guess it does serve him well, doesn't it? That sort of social climber mentality and charm/slime.
Charm/slime. What a way to be.
You built all this.
Dreamt, conceived. I hardly roll my sleeves up. Of course, project's far from finished. There'll be 5 towers in all, circling the lake. Something like an open hand. The lake is the palm, and we stand on the distal phalanx of the index finger. There. I put all my energies into this tower.
What about Jeremy Irons as Royal then? Because he's the architect. He's the person who's like at the top of the food chain. He's the guy who's made this high rise and he's got all these grand ideas for it about like changing the way society is and all this kind of stuff, which doesn't really happen in the way that he envisions. But he's kind of like, he's like supposed to be like the evil boss, isn't he? Like of the dystopia. He's the guy in charge, and he does get seen as this kind of like evil persona, doesn't he, by the guys lower down, specifically Wilder, who sees him as like the enemy.
Yeah, Wilder, it's interesting. Wilder definitely sees him as the figurehead responsible for what's happened to the self-contained society in the block. But I don't know if you can lay it at his feet. He's the architect. He is the architect of the building, and he's the architect of the society, as in he built it. But an architect does not have authority over what he designs. And I think that by the end of the film, that's where it kind of gets to. I don't think he's a particularly good guy, but he's got this weird detachment. Like he's looking out for himself when things fall apart, but he's also got this strange attitude of just like, well, it's been interesting. It's been a useful experiment, and we'll move on to the next one. And I think Wilder's putting more on him personally than certainly than he would want, I think. Because he doesn't even give a shit about Wilder. He's just like, it's this guy again. Better keep my nose clean.
Yeah. And I mean, Royal doesn't seem as bad as some of the other people who are on that sort of top floor, because there's the character played by James Purefoy, Pangborn, who's like leading these guys in tracksuits around and kind of like just doing what he wants to do and like ganging up on the lower classes and just sort of, yeah, there's something quite like malicious about him as well.
Yeah, he's got a more villainous vibe. He's taking what the architect has built and then putting it to using it for evil purposes, basically. And actually, in a weird way, it kind of reminds me of the architect from the third Matrix film. You know, who isn't. Yeah. He's obviously not as villainous as like Agent Smith. He's just like, you know, I'm invested in this system because I built it, but I don't control it. And I'm just sort of keeping an eye on it and seeing where it goes. And I'll build the next one when this one fails. And I'll try and learn from the mistakes and we'll do it again and make it a better one.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think it's like, it's such a strange character to have in there. Like, and also I think him and Lang's relationship so strange as well, because they've both been in relationships with the same woman as well. And like Royal kind of treats Lang as a younger version of himself at certain points. So he can kind of see the potential in Lang, which kind of aligns them together, doesn't it? Because even just like the way Tom Hiddleston and Jeremy Irons kind of look, they've got that kind of like similar kind of look about them.
Yeah.
That Lang could be like the next architect, and that's kind of, it doesn't quite go in that direction, but he ends up on top in a weird way by the end of the film.
Yeah, but there is an element of taking him under his wing, which Lang sort of rejects, doesn't he? Because he gets he sort of like shoves them up against the wall when they're playing squash when everything's okay. He doesn't seem to respond too well, and I suppose and the reason for that is that Royal kind of summons him through his strongman Simmons, and like Simmons just sort of he yanks him around and tosses him into lifts that don't work and stuff like that. So I guess that's Lang's kind of issue with Royal.
And to go back to sort of Wilder again, because we've talked about like these higher ups who kind of like form that gang. Wilder kind of forms like a group around himself, because he's the person who instigates that initial like revolution when they go to the swimming pool and they sort of go, right, we're having a party here, we're using the swimming pool, the kids are allowed to use it, you can't do anything about it, and it descends into a bit of chaos. And he's seen as kind of like a revolutionary, but he's also a bit of an arsehole. So he's kind of like this weird like combination of things, and he's a documentary maker and he's trying to tell the truth about what's going on in the high rise. And they make a point about how his other documentaries have been about prisons, and that the high rise is like a prison now. But like, what did you think of him as sort of like a revolutionary character, and just sort of all the stuff that's going on with him?
I think that Wilder is most interesting when you consider him like a dual protagonist with Lang, because you're right, he does a lot of things that suggest his heart's in the right place, but he is also a bastard. You know, he's out to kill people, and he rapes someone, and then like forces her to like serve him breakfast. You know, he does some seriously unpleasant things. But it's interesting that we have these two characters who seem to be the most moral good we see in the film. Wilder because he wants to, you know, see justice happen in the high rise, and Lang a bit less so. He's pretty neutral, but he's trying to like help the kid and stuff. And he's our narrator, so he's our sort of de facto protagonist. But both of these characters are just, despite whatever good intentions they might have, the breakdown of society and the madness of this madhouse turn them into monsters as well. Wilder through killing and raping people, and Lang just like loses it. Lang just loses it and gets completely detached by the end of the film. But we've got these two protagonists who, in another story, could have led the revolutionary charge or been the voice of reason for Lang. Neither of them are capable of doing that in this world. It drives them both bonkers, basically.
Yeah, and it's all of that, and it's like living in this high rise and undergoing all of these societal changes, but it's still all rooted in the fact that they lose their technology and they lose their amenities.
Yeah.
So they don't have this supermarket. There's no food there anymore. They had the wine at one point. Everyone got very excited about the white wine being there, thinking that would solve all their problems. Very middle class. And then they've got like, then they lose power. And then as soon as they sort of like lose power and they start living by candlelight and it all gets more hedonistic and all of this stuff happens and it's the descent into chaos, they kind of like, they revert back. And it's almost saying like, without the technology in place, because they're so dependent on it, they just become savage when all of this stuff's gone. And yeah, it's just like, it's very interesting the way that they've done it, because it's a dystopian idea that we've seen again and again. You've got the haves and the have-nots, but they've done it in such a, well, Wheatley's done it, he's portrayed it in such a way that there's not even that much of a line between the haves and the have-nots, and it's more like everybody will revert into this savage humanity regardless of their class.
Yeah, and dependent on how much they have, I think, because the haves do hold out for a little bit longer, but they're fully capable of, they're on the verge, and then they do descend into the madness as well, but they're stockpiling more resources up there, I think, which allows them to sort of hold on to civilization, or at least their kind of pretty unpleasant interpretation of civilization.
Yeah, because they take the kids as well, don't they? They take all the kids up there, and they take Wilder's wife, who's pregnant, and they sort of like, it's like they are stockpiling people as well as everything else up at the top.
Yeah, ready to rebuild again when it all blows over. And that's their plan, isn't it? They're going to like, they talk about it in such interesting terms, like colonization of the lower floors, balkanization, and then remodel it into golf courses.
Yeah, so they want it to be even more suited for them, that they so much so that they don't need these lower floors to be filled with people anymore. They just want it to be, again, more amenities for them so that they can carry on living their high life in the high rise.
Yeah, which would obviously not work because they started out with loads of amenities and resources, and then civilization broke down and turned into anarchistic violence, and they're proposing to just wipe out a proportion of the population, put more amenities in, and maybe that'll work. It's not going to work, If like this self-contained society is doomed to fail, you're just going to try again with smaller numbers until that breaks down, and then what? More colonization and balkanization, and stick another golf course in the middle.
And there's something quite culty about all of those people up at the top as well.
Yeah.
And like, especially the way when Royal is killed by Wilder, the way that the women retaliate.
Yes.
It's like that scene in The Handmaid's Tale, where they're all stabbing that guy. That's exactly what it is. They stab him to death in a very brutal way, but they're in a circle and it's very sort of ritualistic. That's another sort of interesting part of it all. And then it ends with Lang speaking in the third person.
Yeah.
So he's like, he's lost it, and he kind of like, he's on top. He's the person at the top. He's in Royal Suite with Charlotte. It's weird how it ends. And speaking of Handmaid's Tale, I forgot that Elizabeth Moss was in this as well.
I completely forgot.
Just to add.
Yeah, it was very interesting hearing him talk in the third person, because obviously I think in the prologue he refers to Lang in the third person, but it's narration, so it's slightly different. It's very different hearing that come out of Tom Hiddleston's mouth to another character when he. Who's he talking to? He's talking to the guy. He's talking to Reece Shearsmith. Oh, it's quite hard to say. And he says he then says, "No, Lang's got patience today." It's very unnerving. It's always weird when people talk about themselves in the third person in the real world. So they're kind of borrowing that like automatic weirdness, but it's the Ben Wheatley layer of menace over it. There's something very unsettling about Lang referring to himself to other characters, not just first person narration as Lang.
Yeah, and it is just that sort of, it's just a bit of menace in that last bit, because you've seen him roast a dog leg, and then he's lost it, and they're just there, and you don't know what's going to happen in this high rise. They're obviously self-contained now, but he's talking about having a party as well, isn't he? He's going back into that sort of initial stuff where they were having parties in his head. That's what they should be doing now, because that's what they do in the high rise.
Yeah, talking about throwing a party, and back to the opening line of narration from the prologue, which is something like, life in the high rise was not too bad, or something like that. Which I think when you first hear it in the prologue, it sort of feels like he's talking about life in the high rise back in the old days was not too bad. But it's clear in the epilogue that he's saying I've lost my mind, and life in the high rise is not too bad because I've lost my mind, and that's the only way to get along in this this fractured society. Not fractured, completely vanished society.
Fucked. It's really fucked.
Fucked, yeah, fucked.
For all its inconveniences, Lang was satisfied with life in the high rise.
Well, I think both of these films, High Rise and The Lobster, are very they're very personalised dystopias as well, and they're very self-contained. They take place in similar kind of places. You've got a hotel and not much more than a hotel, and you've got the high rise and not much more than the high rise. You see a few extra places, but they are dystopias localised into certain spots, and that kind of intensifies everything that's going on within the characters.
Yeah, with also just lots of elements of surrealism, strangeness, and humour in the mix as well. But both really enjoyable. I'd seen High Rise before, but I certainly enjoyed it more this time around. It's a satisfying descent into madness. And I really enjoyed The Lobster as well.
Satisfying descent into madness. That's brilliant. I love that.
And yeah, The Lobster was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. Had you seen both of these before? You'd seen The Lobster, yeah, and you've seen The Lobster.
Yeah. Although part of me was like, I was hoping that they were as dystopian as I remembered, but yeah, they definitely proved to be dystopian.
Well, I hadn't seen The Lobster before, but watching High Rise again, High Rise is a more enjoyable film. Having watched a lot of dystopian films recently and kind of been talking to you about it, that having that background and seeing it through that lens made it a much more enjoyable and interesting film for me.
Yeah. It was interesting revisiting both of these. But next week on the show, we have a special for you. We have an anime special. Everything's animated and brighter than it has been in some of the previous episodes. And what two animated films are we going to be looking at, Matt?
Yeah, action taking place on a much grander scale in these two. We're going to be looking at probably the biggest anime movie of all time. Is that going too far to suggest that? Akira, the all-time classic anime film. And we're also looking at Metropolis, the 2001 anime remake, reimagining, retake on the same theme of the classic sci-fi film that we looked at way back in Series 1.
Yes, I think it's going to be interesting looking at that version of Metropolis compared to the one which we've covered on our first episode, pretty much, wasn't it? Way back when. But yeah, so it's going to be interesting looking at that, and I'm very much looking forward to watching Akira again because, like you said, it was such a monumental film in anime, and it kind of popularized the sort of medium as well in the West. But we will get into all of that stuff next week on the podcast.
So do join us for that. Really looking forward to those two films. In the meantime, if you want to get in touch with us, you can, as always, reach out to us by email, journeythroughsci-fi@gmail.com. You can find us on all the social medias that I'm sure you're on. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you stop by on Facebook, you can also join our discussion group and come and chat to us and other listeners there.
Yes, do come and join in on the chat on the social media channels. And if you want bonus episodes, bonus content, you can come and join us on Patreon as well. For a small sum per month, you can get bonus episodes. And like we said earlier in today's episode, we're covering everything everywhere all at once very soon. So that'll be a good episode to get and download.
If you want to support the show but you don't want to join the Patreon, that's absolutely fine. You can leave us a nice review. If you leave us 5 stars and some text, that helps the review find more people. So why don't you leave us a review and let us know what animal you would become if you were in that kind of a dystopia.
Yes, please do. Well, until the next episode, I'm going to go back into my high rise and try not to get turned into an animal.
I'm barricading the fucking doors, mate. Let's get out of here.